I'm Melissa Wood and I'm here to introduce a brilliant short film about careers in the games industry. I started out as a journalist and I pretty quickly realised there was a really important role to play in reporting on games and recognising their entertainment, educational and cultural value. A lot of coverage was focused on technical developments, which is great, but I also wanted to recognise the creative individuals working in games, who bring the same level of artistic excellence to their work that the film and TV industry does. BAFTA is probably best known for its film and TV awards, but for over 15 years it's also been recognising achievements in games. 10 years ago, it introduced Young Game Designers, which is a fantastic initiative that inspires and supports young people like yourselves to create, develop and present their new game idea to the world. It's open to 10 to 18-year-olds and there are categories for game concept and game making, divided between two age groups. YGD provides a brilliant introduction to the games industry, as well as really valuable networking opportunities, so I hugely recommend it if you have a passion for games. In fact, some of the first winners are now working in the industry and have even been BAFTA nominated. So here's some practical advice and top tips to get you thinking about careers in the games industry.
Hi, my name is Declan Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Into Games, and we're an organisation that's set up to help people find a rewarding career in the games industry. No matter where you are in your career journey, we can help. If you're just starting out to make games, the good news is that this is a fantastic time. It's never been better. We're at a really exciting point where games, movies, kind of all kinds of entertainment are converging into one place. So you've got really exciting stuff happening with VR and AR and immersive experiences, and actually the barrier to entry in terms of you creating your own games has also never been lower. So no matter kind of what skill set you currently have, whether you've developed games before, whether you've done some programming, whether you've done some art, or whether you're literally just starting out and you just like the idea of getting into games, there are different places for you to jump into. So you might be able to start building your own games using something called Game Maker 2, which is a really, really simple programming tool. Then you can kind of move your way up to stuff like Unity or Unreal. These are the same tools that are being used in kind of big budget Hollywood movies currently. So things like The Mandalorian currently uses the Unreal Engine to generate all its backgrounds. So this is a really interesting time where games used to be something that were just over here that people used to play, and TV and film was over here. Now it's all kind of converging into the same space, and that means that there's so many more opportunities to kind of jump into that world, whether you want to be a creator in the kind of film and TV and narrative driven world, or whether you want to be someone that's building games from scratch and working for a big studio, or developing your own games as a small indie. So over the next few minutes we're going to talk about what might be your approach for getting your first job in games, and some of you might be quite far away from that, some of you might be kind of closer to that, but we're going to look at a few different things that you should all be thinking about when approaching that first piece of work that you do. And the first one we're going to look at is ABC, and that stands for always be creating. You should be always constantly working on small projects at this stage in your career, building up your skills as quickly as possible with these kind of tiny, could be one level projects, could be testing a certain mechanic. Basically, the more games you make, the more skilled you're going to be. What you don't want to be doing, certainly at the start of your career, is thinking about trying to make some sprawling MMO or something like Fortnite, because you're just not ready for that yet. What you want to be doing is making tiny little games and just building up your skill set as you go. And that doesn't matter whether you want to go down a creative arts route or a narrative design route or a programmer route. You might not know that at that particular stage, but what you want to be doing is constantly creating games in small ways just to build up your confidence levels and get to a point where you're going to be really somebody that once you get to your job interview, you're going to have a really wide-ranging portfolio of work that you're going to be able to point to and feel confident in your own ability. So one of the other big lessons that you need to learn when building these small games is to finish things. That's a huge, huge thing that people learn kind of on the job a lot of the time. Sometimes you just got to call it a day on a project. And whether that's a small project or a big project, the thing with games is you can always be adding stuff to them. You can always be improving them. You can always be making them better. But sometimes it's better to say that's done and to move on to the next thing. And that takes people years to learn sometimes. But if you, at this kind of early stage in your career, can learn that quickly, that's going to be like a really big difference later on when you're talking to big studios, talking to small indies, getting your first job. It's a skill that's really prized. Next up is make games that you love. I know this seems really obvious. You're at a really special point in your career right now where you are beholden to no one. There's no manager or big studio behind you telling you what you have to make, talking about target markets and things that you have to think about potentially when you're commercially selling your game. You can make a game about anything. And that's not just about first-person shooters or any of the kind of common games that you see out there maybe today. It's stuff that's personal to you. It's something that maybe it's happened in your life that you want to get a message across, and that's where it gets really, really interesting. Games is a new kind of field when it comes to talking about and developing important cultural narratives. And you as an early stage game creator can really talk about important things that affect you, your family, things that affect the planet right now, anything that you want to kind of get across in a really interactive, interesting way. So I think it's really, really important to use this time to develop games that are weird, that are wonderful, that say something about you, because once again, when you go to your first job and you show off your portfolio, they're going to really want to see that creativity. And so at this point in your career, just let it flow. So you've got all this potential creativity, you've got the ability to make any game you possibly want. Sometimes it can be really hard to come up with your first idea. We suggest in those situations is to join a game jam. Now, if you don't know what a game jam is is basically a live brief or a theme or an idea that's given to you, and you have to deliver a game in a set amount of time. Usually that's kind of 24 hours or 48 hours or really no more than a week usually. You can find game jams all over the internet. We recommend going to itch.io is a great place to find those. And they can basically kind of help you with coming up with that first little bit. It's always hard to write the first sentence, so sometimes just having someone else give you a theme is a great place to start. So we recommend doing as many game jams as possible, especially in the early stages. But game jams are something that you'll probably do throughout your career because they're really, really fun, and there can be fantastic communities of game makers associated with different game jams, which is fantastic because you can then use that community to ask questions and build up your skill set further. So remember, always be creating. Work on projects that are important to you. It's totally 100% okay to get things wrong, and you will, and that's fine. Don't be too precious about your ideas, and always be asking questions. So let's talk about your pathway. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about your educational pathway and then your pathway into work. Now, depending on where you are, you might be thinking about doing your GCSEs or equivalent quite soon, or moving into higher education, going to college, that kind of thing. There's a broad variety of roles in games. So everything from a games accountant through to a receptionist, through to dozens of different kinds of programmers, through to loads of different kinds of concept artists, environment artists, 3D modelers. Pretty much everything you can kind of imagine is in the game sector when it comes to different roles. If you think about a game, it's a huge task to create a AAA game, and sometimes you can need thousands of people to develop something like GTA 5, for example. You don't need to know exactly your pathway when you're 16 years old. That would be a lot to ask someone. It's great if you can roughly know if you want to go down a more creative pathway or maybe a more technical pathway, but it's still a chance for you to kind of experiment which way you want to go. Now, most people in the industry do have a degree. A lot of them don't do the degree that they end up being in the job for, but they do have a degree. Now, that's kind of changing, which is a good thing. There should be lots of different pathways because people learn differently. Now, when you're deciding what, for example, subjects you might want to choose when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, we really recommend doing potentially a mix of creative and technical subjects at that stage. So you kind of have a broad variety of different skills to draw upon when you do decide to specialize. So potentially doing computer science and art is a fantastic combination. And certainly when you get to the point where you're pitching in front of employers for your first role, that's going to be seen as a really, really positive thing that you did there and positive choice that you made, because employers are definitely looking for people that are creative and technical at the same time, because that's what games are. So the main thing you want to do is do something that you're passionate about. So if you're passionate about art and creating concept art, you need to be doing some form of kind of art degree or some kind of further education within that field. Whether it's programming, you need to be doing computer science and getting to the point where once you finish your degree, if you go down that pathway, you've become a bit of a specialist in that area. And certainly when you apply for your first job role, at that point in your career, studios are going to want to see that you're a bit of a specialist, or at least on your way to becoming a specialist. That said, a job into games could be a winding path for you. Certainly there are lots of people in games that might want to be a concept artist or want to be an AI programmer, but they start off usually in a different role and then kind of move their way through a studio, understanding how it works, understanding how the production process works, to the point where they get the role that they want. Usually at that entry-level stage, you might be lucky and you might get a junior role in exactly the kind of area or discipline that you want to go into. But a lot of people start in something called QA, which stands for Quality Assurance. And that's a role whereby you test the game as it's being produced to know where the bugs are, to understand what things could play better. QA is a standalone pathway that you can become a master at and do for the rest of your life. But a lot of people decide to do QA at a junior level as one of their first roles, and that's a great entry point into the sector. If you do a games or games-related degree and you don't get a job straight away, don't be disheartened. It might be 2, 3, 4 jobs before you actually end up getting a role in the game sector. And those jobs that you do in between, they're not wasted. One of the greatest game makers in the world is a guy called Hideo Kojima, and he pretty much created stealth games. So Metal Gear Solid was Hideo Kojima's game. That's what he's come up with. He's been working on that whole series from the beginning. Hideo Kojima didn't start as a game designer. He had tons of different jobs before he got to that point. So he was a gardener, he was a chef, he was a wedding photographer. And when you speak to him now, he says that a lot of those job roles and the things that happened to him in those job roles influence the way that he makes games now. So I think that's a really good example of never being disheartened that you're not where you want to be. Where you are, there's always things that you can learn and bring to that later on at a later stage. So how do studios hire? Other than posting jobs on websites and their own social media, studios use a range of different ways to kind of bring in new staff. One of those, and probably one of the most accessible routes, is through internships. And studios usually recruit for internships directly from universities or through university courses. In an internship, you might end up working for 6 months to a year with that studio, kind of starting to understand how that studio runs in a junior position, which they might decide to keep you on for afterwards. If they don't, then you've got 6 months to a year's worth of experience working in a studio, which is essential for when you're applying for your next role. The games industry is actually really great at paying their staff, so even in internship positions, you'll probably most likely be paid for that period of time as well. Also, recruiting through game communities happens. So you might be someone that plays a lot of Minecraft or probably more recently Dreams. Those games are about making more games. So they have all the tools in there for you to build your own levels, for you to design your own games from scratch. Now, the designers of those games often look at the games that have been made in those games to recruit new staff. So actually, by playing some of these games, especially the ones where you have to build and make things, actually that could be a fantastic route for you to get a job either in that studio or for you to point to the games that you make in those games to put into your portfolio and then apply for your next role. A big part of getting a job in games is actually networking. Networking can feel a little bit scary to do at first. Basically, it's just going out there and speaking to people that are already working in games to get advice, help and support for you to get your own job at some point. Now, you could go out there and do that at events, you could do that through mentorship programs, you could do that through joining online communities. So this might be quite hard to do if you are 16 years old. But there are still a ton of different ways that you can reach out to people online to get the connections that hopefully one day will give you that extra little bit of help to get the role that you want. You can also show off your talent in game jams. That's another great way of showing to employers that you can start and finish a game in a relatively short amount of time to a certain quality. Right, so now we're going to talk about your portfolio. And most hiring decisions are going to be made on the basis of your portfolio. Your portfolio is simply a collection of your best work in one place. That could be a website that you've made to display your work, or it could be using an online portfolio tool like ArtStation, or even programming-wise, something like GitHub. When you're building your portfolio, remember the key following things. Only include your best work. Look at other work on platforms like ArtStation or itch.io to understand what kind of level you should be aiming for. When applying for a specific role, make sure you've thought about the kind of games that studio makes and that you're showing work that reflects that. Make sure your portfolio works on a variety of screen sizes. Keep it up to date with new work. Demonstrate that you understand workflows. Show that you've worked in a team to make a game before, and never ever ever copy or add other people's work to your portfolio. If you'd like any more information about any career role in the sector, go to intergames.org, where we've mapped out over 100 different job roles with educational pathways attached to each. You can apply for mentorship or view hundreds of different opportunities all over the UK for you to get started building games right away. So good luck in your journey and go start making games.
My name's Elizabeth McCurry and I'm a Developer Relations Manager at Unity. We have many developers using Unity for games, but we also have automotive, industry and engineering. We're used in media and entertainment, so you might have seen a series called Baymax Dreams, which was a collaboration with Disney TV and animation. So we're used across a wide range of industries for a lot of different kinds of content. I was always interested in computer games, and I was always interested in how they worked, but I never really realised it was a career until I did my A-levels, and degrees were popping up for like games design, games programming. I didn't really know much about it, so I did my A-levels and I went and did medical genetics, and then I realised that the reason I'd done that is because of the genome soldiers in Metal Gear Solid. And so then I thought I should just go into games. And so I originally did a games design course at Huddersfield University. And there was design, animation, 3D modelling, and then a programming module. And I found when I graduated that I was far better at the programming side. So I left university and I was a web developer for a number of years. And then to make my move into the industry, I started attending job fairs. So EGX, when Alien Isolation was just being released, Creative Assembly were doing a talk about how they developed and created Alien Isolation. And I went to the careers fair afterwards to speak to them about how I could transition with the skills that I had in web development into the games industry. And they told me about creative skill set, and that if I applied to be on a creative skill set accredited course, that they offered internships at the time. So I was like, right, I'm going to do this. So I found a master's in computer game software development at Sheffield Hallam University. I applied to that, was successful and got on the course, which was amazing. And then my course tutor, Jacob, said, you should apply for this BAFTA scholarship. It's amazing. So I applied to that, didn't expect to hear anything, didn't think it would amount to anything. I was asked to go to interview, so I went down to BAFTA HQ in London, Piccadilly, and did this interview in front of all these industry veterans. I was absolutely terrified. And then, to my surprise, I was offered the BAFTA scholarship, but the Prince William scholarship, which was actually a collaboration between BAFTA and Warner Brothers. So I was able to complete my master's with the support of BAFTA and Warner Brothers, And then once I graduated, I had an internship with Warner Brothers. So a very windy path, but very, very lucky. One of my biggest pieces of advice to anybody who is wanting to get into the games industry is to not be afraid to ask for a mentor. And there's actually so many initiatives in the games industry that offer mentorship as part of their initiatives. So Women in Games, the BAFTA scholarships are just two examples. There's Limit Break mentorship in London. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there and to ask. That's like my biggest piece of advice. And aside from the mentoring is the networking. So the scholarship opened my eyes to the networking opportunities, such as the BAFTA Crew. So BAFTA Crew is for entry level into the industry in film, television and games. And you can meet your peers and you can share your work and you can just meet like-minded individuals, and it's just super inspiring. What I would say about portfolio is really show your individual passions and interests. So if you're applying for a job, a lot of employers are going to see the same kind of projects and assignments over and over again. And so what will really stand you out is a project that you have done off your own back that is fueled with the passion and like what drives you. Maybe you get involved with game jams. So there's Global Game Jam that you can join online, for example, and you're showing what your interests are beyond just what you've been taught or what you think is expected from a portfolio. And that's like my biggest piece of advice. Focus on the areas which you want to hone and work on, and don't expect perfection because you're going to learn on the job. So do your best and focus on what you're interested in, but don't beat yourself up if you have that imposter syndrome of thinking that you're not the best, because you're going to be learning so much from so many people when you get started. And just be open and receptive to that feedback and advice that you're getting on the work that you may be taking to interview. I have not spoken to one person who has had the same path. So I know a lot of people who have done the academic route. I know a lot of people that may have worked in like film and TV and moved into games. And I know a lot of people that haven't been to university and have just worked on a portfolio and honed their skills to a point that they could like go to interview. There's no one way. And so you will hear lots of people giving you advice or saying, I did this or I did that or I recommend this. But actually everybody's path is totally different. And with that in mind, if you start off wanting to be a particular something, so for example, I started off wanting to be a programmer. I really wanted to be an engine programmer. That was like my dream. And I ended up taking opportunities in marketing, which was a huge curveball. So I had this master's in programming and I was doing marketing, and that's how I eventually found my role at Unity as an evangelist, which was a balance of the two. And I never knew that role existed. So I think there's no one way to get into the industry, but if you're true to yourself and kind of follow what you feel is best for you, you will find your place. There are so many resources available for those that are wanting to break into the games industry, regardless of your age. So I mentioned BAFTA Young Games Designers. I think that's a fantastic initiative. Also, a lot of game engines such as Unity have free resources online to get started. And my advice would be that if you're really interested in a particular game, you enjoy it, try and target what it is about that game that you like. And then you can start that path of, okay, so I'm really interested in how this character moves around in this world. Maybe it's animation. And then you can start looking at tutorials or going down those paths. And then as you progress, one thing that I did that was really useful is I would look on the career websites of games companies that I loved, and I would look at their job descriptions and see what was required of each role and what I needed to get there. And then that would be my path, that would be my goal, and that's what I would work towards. So to summarise, I'd say find what it is that you enjoy and what you want to follow. Look online for the free resources and initiatives that are available to you, and then build your portfolio of that discipline and just keep running with that. Definitely. And share it with your friends. If your friends are doing that kind of stuff as well, I think it's good at an early age to get used to sharing what you've created and getting that feedback and getting used to that feedback.
Hi, I'm Alex Francois and I'm an indie game developer. So that means I create games independently. I basically do everything: the writing, the music, the programming, the design and the art. And I often self-publish games online in stores like Steam, but I also will work with publishers on particular projects, and they will publish my game and help me develop it. At university, I studied game design for only half a year before I quit and changed to English literature. So my thinking was that I'd been making games since a young age with anything I could get my hands on. So there's lots of free software. At the time there wasn't quite as much as there is now. Things like Unity didn't exist. There were very early versions of Game Maker, but I would use whatever I could get my hands on, so Microsoft Excel even. And so when it came to a game design degree, I felt that it was very much aimed at teaching a very specific way to design a game. When I kind of knew how to make games already, I wanted to broaden my knowledge of other areas. So I chose English literature because I liked writing. And I felt if I ever want to get into games after university, I can find my own way in. My first job after graduating was at Groupon, which is a daily deals website. That really helped on kind of building my confidence working in a group, and also it helped improve my writing skills. But it was after working there for almost 2 years that I almost remembered that I loved making games. So I started applying for a couple of jobs as a writer in games. So basically writing the story of a game. And I noticed I wasn't getting those jobs, perhaps because I didn't have enough experience in games writing. So I decided that I would make my own game. So I left my job at Groupon and I launched a Kickstarter project. So that's a crowdfunding project where I put up a trailer that I'd made for a game I started developing, and I said, I need this much money to finish this game. Would you like to help me? If you put in the money, you get a copy of the finished game. So that was successful, and I spent about 2.5 years making that game. And that, in a lot of ways, that was almost like my university education in games. I was learning on the job, basically, and all the challenges that arose, I had to figure out a way of solving them because people were relying on me to deliver something. The route I've taken is very unconventional in that I didn't study game design, which I feel many people in the industry of an older age haven't studied game design. They've studied all different areas, whether it's engineering, other types of design, computer science, because games are something that encapsulate many different art forms and different life experiences. So I think it's hard to put that in one course. So a great approach is to just work on improving yourself as a person in general. So learning more things, learning very specific things as well, that not everyone will know, and then you can bring that into what you create, so what you create will be unique. The pros of it are that I've had a lot of independence. I can choose what I work on. I can come up with the most out there ideas and develop them into games, and I don't have to ask anyone for permission for that. I've learned a lot. It's been a case of, as I said before, learning on the job. So some of the cons are that you have to make your own mistakes because there's no one there to teach you because you're on your own. But these mistakes are what help you learn and grow. I'd recommend my route for people that maybe aren't necessarily finding anything that they relate to in the traditional route and are feeling a bit trapped by the prospect of starting in a big studio or something like that. Although I do think that experience is really important, working in a team, because there are certain things you don't learn working alone. I'd advise, when working on any kind of creative project, that you work on something that you really believe in and really love and really feel needs to exist in the world. I think many people can approach a project, or whether that's a game, a film, a book, in a way of what is there a market for? What is there a gap in the market for? What do people need? And creating something with that attitude, I think, will only get you so far. It won't get you over the humps when you're feeling not as motivated as you were at the start. You need to be creating something that you love, that you believe in, that you feel needs to be made because it doesn't exist in the world and it has a message. Whether that's just having fun or something deeper, it makes no difference. So that would be my advice, to make sure you're making something you love, because when it goes to those slump points, you'll still believe in the project and it'll push through. So, best of luck.
Well, I hope you found that interesting. Make sure to check out the sites that Declan recommended, and also BAFTA's YGD site with free resources for teachers. And again, please do think about entering the YGD competition when it relaunches this autumn. It's the perfect kickstart if you're considering games as a career. Finally, a huge thank you to our friends at Cinemagic for inviting us to participate in the festival and giving us the opportunity to talk about the exciting and creative opportunities within games.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.